In the endless expanse where stars whisper secrets to the void, there existed a peace so fragile it could shatter at the slightest touch. The Galactic Assembly had just celebrated 15 years of unprecedented harmony. 15 years without the stern, demanding voices of humanity echoing through their crystalline halls. They had believed themselves wiser for the silence. They were about to learn just how wrong they had been. Ambassador Thane Vorik of the Crithian Dominion stood before the Grand Assembly, his translucent skin shimmering with satisfaction as he addressed the gathered representatives. The assembly chamber was vast and magnificent, a dome of living crystal that pulsed with the collective thoughts of 200 civilizations. Each species had sent their finest minds, their greatest diplomats, and today they had gathered to commemorate their greatest achievement, freedom from human interference. Beside Vorik sat Chancellor Myra Ventress, a Selthian whose forearms gestured gracefully as she presented the prosperity reports. Trade was flourishing. Science was advancing at a breathtaking pace. Wars had become nearly extinct. The numbers painted a beautiful, undeniable picture of cooperation and progress. Gone were the days when human warships patrolled their borders, when the stern Admiral Patricia Valdez had stood in this very chamber, issuing her dire warnings of a great darkness lurking beyond the rim. The Assembly had dismissed her as paranoid, militaristic, and dangerous. They had given humanity a simple, final ultimatum: surrender your weapons and submit to our oversight, or leave our unified space forever. Humanity had chosen exile without a moment's hesitation. They had gathered their fleets, shuttered their embassies, and vanished beyond the frontier like ghosts fading at dawn. Good riddance, the Assembly had collectively declared. Let the warmongers lurk in their dark corner of the galaxy, while civilized beings built something better, something brighter. Vorik vividly remembered the profound relief he had felt, watching the last human vessel disappear into the cold blackness of deep space. He remembered the grand celebration that followed, the countless toasts raised to a more enlightened future. Now, 15 years later, that future had arrived in full, glorious bloom. Medical advances from the Delphine Collective had extended lifespans across 20 different species. The brilliant Antarian engineers had completely revolutionized faster-than-light travel, cutting journey times across the galaxy by a staggering 40%. Even the long-standing, bitter territorial dispute between the Vorax clans and the Meridian hegemony had been resolved through peaceful, patient arbitration. "We stand as proof," Vorik announced, his voice carrying with resonant pride through the vast chamber, "that violence is not the answer. That cooperation triumphs over aggression. That we never needed humanity's weapons to keep us safe." The assembled delegates erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. Chancellor Ventress rose to her feet, all four hands clasped in a powerful gesture of unity. A young diplomat, Rafe Thornwell from the Kashan Federation, beamed with pride. He had never known the galaxy when humans walked among them. To his entire generation, humanity was little more than a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of what happened when a species chose guns over dialogue. The celebration continued for another hour. Delegates shared incredible stories of progress, of stunning scientific breakthroughs, of cultural exchanges that had enriched every single participating world. The future stretched before them like an open road beneath clear, endless skies. Nothing could touch them now. Nothing could ever threaten this perfect, delicate peace they had so carefully constructed. And the lights flickered. It started small, a barely perceptible dimming that most of the delegates dismissed as a minor power fluctuation. But Vorik noticed. He had not become an ambassador by ignoring the small details. The crystal walls, which normally pulsed with a steady, comforting bioluminescence, wavered like a heartbeat growing irregular. Around him, other delegates began to notice too. Conversations faltered. Smiles faded into expressions of concern. A junior aide rushed into the chamber, his face pale despite his species' naturally dark complexion. Vorik recognized him as Jesper Kane, Ventress's personal assistant, a young man who never, ever interrupted important sessions unless it was absolutely necessary. Kane moved with such frantic urgency that several delegates turned in their seats to watch his hurried approach. Chancellor Ventress accepted the data tablet from Kane's trembling hands. As she read the message displayed on the screen, her skin shifted from its usual vibrant golden hue to a sickly, pale gray. Her forearms went rigid at her sides. When she looked up at the assembly, a raw primal fear shone in her eyes for the first time in Vorik's long acquaintance with her. "We have lost contact with the Outer Rim colonies," Ventress announced, her voice hollow, stripped of all its earlier warmth. 14 systems. Complete communications blackout for the past 2 hours. The chamber fell into a stunned, absolute silence. 14 systems did not just go dark by accident. 14 systems meant something catastrophic. Vorik felt a cold, hard knot of ice forming in his chest. The Outer Rim colonies housed billions of souls, protected by state-of-the-art defensive grids and rapid response fleets. What could possibly silence them so quickly, so completely? "Perhaps it's a solar event," suggested Rafe Thornwell, his youth showing in his desperate, grasping optimism. A magnetic storm could be disrupting communications arrays across multiple systems, but Vorik knew better. He had studied astrophysics before entering the diplomatic service. Solar events did not strike 14 systems simultaneously across light years of space. This was something else. This was something far, far worse. More reports began to flood in over the next 30 minutes. The blackout was spreading like a plague. 20 systems, 30, 45. Each new update brought fresh waves of panic rippling through the assembly. Delegates started shouting questions that no one could answer. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for emergency evacuation protocols to be enacted. A few simply sat frozen in their seats, their minds unable to process the sheer magnitude of what was happening. Vorik quickly accessed the tactical displays on his personal console, pulling up detailed maps of the affected regions. The pattern that emerged made his blood run cold. The blackouts formed a perfect, clean arc, sweeping through space with chilling, geometric precision. This was not random. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was an invasion, methodical and seemingly unstoppable. "Deploy the defense fleets," Chancellor Ventress ordered, her voice regaining some of its authority, cutting through the rising chaos. "Send Commander Dax Reardon with Battle Group Omega to investigate. We need eyes on the situation immediately." Reardon was their finest military officer, a tactical genius who had never lost a single battle. His fleet consisted of 75 of the most advanced warships the Assembly could produce, equipped with the latest weapons technology their science had to offer. If anyone could handle this crisis, it was Reardon. Vorik watched the tactical display as the battle group jumped toward the Outer Rim, their formation perfect, their confidence absolute. The entire assembly waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Vorik found himself holding his breath, his eyes glued to the silent communication console. Around him, the representatives of 200 species waited in a collective, heavy silence for news from the frontier. When Commander Reardon's transmission finally came through, a wave of relief flooded the chamber. But that relief died the instant they saw his face. His transmission was a single static-filled frame, frozen in time. Reardon's face was a mask of sheer terror, his eyes wide with a horror that defied description. But it wasn't just the fear. Half of his face, along with the bridge of his flagship behind him, was simply gone, replaced by a jagged, seething tear in reality itself. Then the transmission cut out, replaced by a deafening silence that was far more terrifying than any scream. Battle Group Omega was gone. 75 warships, thousands of crew, wiped from existence in an instant. It was in that soul-crushing silence that the new message arrived. It appeared on the main view screen, not through any of their communication channels, but burned directly onto the crystal dome itself. The letters were stark, black, and in a language no one recognized, yet everyone understood. It read, "Your peace was a lie. Your safety was an illusion. We are the Void Swarm, and we are coming for you all." The words pulsed with a malevolent energy, a promise of total annihilation. Panic finally broke the dam of discipline. The chamber erupted into pure, unadulterated chaos. But Vorik could only stare at the message, a single chilling realization dawning in his mind. The warnings of Admiral Valdez, the paranoid militarism of humanity. It hadn't been paranoia at all. It had been preparation. Humanity hadn't been the warmongers of the galaxy. They had been its wardens. They hadn't built their fleets for conquest, but for defense against a threat the rest of the galaxy had refused to even see. Chancellor Ventress collapsed into her chair, her forearms covering her face in despair. Rafe Thornwell stared blankly, the naive ideals of his generation shattered in a single terrifying moment. "What have we done?" Ventress whispered, her voice barely audible. "We sent them away. We sent our only hope away." As the assembly descended into madness, Vorik's mind raced. They were out of time. Their fleets were a joke. Their peace was a fragile shell that had just been shattered. There was only one option left. A desperate, impossible long shot. He scrambled to his own console, his hands flying across the controls, digging through ancient, archived diplomatic channels that hadn't been used in 15 years. He had to find it. The emergency frequency, the one humanity had left behind. Admiral Valdez had given it to his predecessor with a final, somber warning. Use this only when you have no other choice. When the darkness finally comes, the darkness was here. Vorik found the encrypted channel and began broadcasting a simple, repeating message, pouring all of his desperation and regret into the signal. It was a plea, a confession, and a prayer, all rolled into one, sent out into the cold, empty void where they had banished their saviors. He sent it towards the unknown frontier, into the darkness where the ghosts of humanity now dwelled. He could only hope they were still out there, and that after 15 years of bitter exile, they would be willing to listen. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next dive into the unknown. We'll see you in the next one. For 20 years, Commander Dax Reardon had been the unwavering shield of the Galactic Assembly. Pirate raids, illegal weapons smuggling, even 2 planetary invasion attempts. He had faced them all and emerged victorious. But as his fleet entered the Sigma Meridian system, a cold dread unlike any he'd ever known began to settle in his bones. Nothing in his decorated career could have prepared him for this. The planet itself was a picture-perfect jewel hanging in the blackness of space. Its vibrant blue oceans and sprawling green continents matched the colonial records exactly. Yet the scene was horrifyingly wrong. The orbital stations, usually bustling hubs of activity, were dark and silent, drifting like abandoned mausoleums. The network of communication satellites was shattered, leaving gaping holes in the sky like missing teeth in a grim smile. And the surface was a canvas of devastation. Where 17 million colonists had built thriving cities just days ago, there were now vast, scorched patches of Earth. It was a silence that screamed. "Run full spectrum scans," Reardon ordered, his voice tight. He turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Sienna Wolf. "I want to know what happened here." The bridge of his flagship, the Aegis, was tense, the crew's faces reflecting the eerie void outside. The scan results painted a picture of a nightmare beyond comprehension. The cities hadn't been obliterated by any known weapon. There were no telltale signs of bombardment, no blast craters, no residual radiation, no debris fields. It was as if entire urban centers had been meticulously erased by an incomprehensible force. Buildings, vehicles, people, all of it was simply gone. In their place, The land was scarred with strange, crystalline structures, forming geometric patterns that seemed to warp reality, hurting the eyes to look at for too long. A sharp gasp from Wolf's station cut through the silence. "Commander," she called out, her voice strained with fear. "I'm reading energy signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts. Very, very large. On the main view screen, they emerged. Like great predators stepping out from the shadow of the system's gas giant, the enemy fleet revealed itself. Reardon's tactical display lit up with hostile contacts. 50, 70, 100. The numbers climbed relentlessly until over 300 enemy vessels filled his screens. Each one was massive, a behemoth of unknown origin, unlike anything recorded in any galactic database. Their very design defied all known principles of starship engineering. The hulls seemed grown, not built, a bizarre fusion of organic, flowing curves and impossibly sharp geometric angles. They pulsed with an internal light, their colors shifting through spectrums that made Reardon's eyes ache. They moved with a chilling, synchronized purpose, spreading into a perfect attack formation with a coordination that was both beautiful and terrifying. Reardon took a steadying breath, pushing down the rising tide of alarm. "Broadcast on all frequencies," he commanded, his voice echoing with authority. "This is Commander Dax Reardon of the Galactic Assembly Defense Force. Identify yourselves and state your intentions." His message was met with absolute silence. The alien fleet continued its silent, implacable advance. Along their strange, organic hulls, weapons ports began to open like countless eyes slowly waking to stare down their prey. Reardon felt a bead of sweat trace a path down his temple, the bridge's climate control suddenly feeling useless. Every combat instinct he had honed over 2 decades was screaming at him. This wasn't a pirate raid. This wasn't a political statement. This was an extermination. Shields to maximum. All weapons ready. Reardon's voice rang out. "If they fire, return it with everything we have." The aliens fired first. Silent, blinding streams of purple-white energy lanced across the void, striking his forward ships with unerring accuracy. Shields flared brilliantly, absorbing the initial assault. A collective sigh of relief flickered through the bridge crew. Their defenses were holding. The hope was tragically short-lived. The second volley came. This time, the energy beams didn't impact the shields. They passed straight through the defensive barriers, as if they were nothing more than light and shadow, phasing directly into the ship hulls beneath. Metal shrieked on a molecular level as its bonds were dissolved. The frigate Tempest, a proud vessel with a crew of 200, simply broke apart in utter silence, its sailors dying before they could even register their own end. Within seconds, 2 more ships vanished in the same horrific way. "Evasive maneuvers," Reardon roared. "Return fire, all batteries." Battle Group Omega fought with the desperate courage of the doomed. Plasma cannons and missile launchers unleashed enough firepower to level continents. The projectiles and energy bolts crossed the distance and struck the alien ships and did nothing. The weapons dissipated harmlessly against hulls that seemed to flicker in and out of normal space. Everything they threw at the enemy was useless. The alien vessels advanced, unhindered and methodical, destroying assembly ships one by one. At her console, Lieutenant Wolf worked with frantic desperation, her fingers flying across the controls, cycling through every tactical solution she could imagine. "They're shields." "They're not shields," she stammered, her voice cracking. "They operate on principles we don't understand. Our weapons are useless." Reardon could only watch in horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled. The cruiser Valiant exploded in a silent, brilliant flash of white. The destroyer Steadfast lost power and drifted helplessly before being torn apart by the phasing lances. One by one, the lights representing his ships blinked out on the tactical display. In 15 minutes, he had lost 30 vessels. In 30 minutes, more than 50 were gone. His men and women fought with valor, with everything they had, but they might as well have been throwing rocks at mountains. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he had no choice. "Fall back," Reardon finally ordered, his voice hollow. "All remaining ships, retreat to Rally Point Theta. We need to warn the assembly." What was left of his fleet turned and ran, engines screaming as they jumped to faster-than-light speed. The alien fleet didn't pursue. They didn't need to. They had made their point with terrifying clarity. They had demonstrated their absolute, unquestionable superiority. Now, they simply continued their methodical, silent advance into assembly space, ready to erase the next system, the next world. Reardon's transmission arrived at the assembly high chamber on the capital world of Cygnus. 10-1, the assembled delegates from 1,000 worlds watched in stunned horror. They saw the tactical footage of their finest commander reporting a total, crushing defeat. They saw their most advanced weapons passing through enemy ships like ghosts. They heard the final, clipped screams of crews as their ships disintegrated. They witnessed the complete and utter futility of the Galactic Assembly's military might. For Ambassador Vorik, the chamber began to spin. This wasn't possible. 15 years of peace. 15 years of unprecedented progress and cooperation. All of it was turning to dust in a single afternoon. Around him, the stoic composure of the galaxy's leaders shattered. Delegates descended into chaos. Some wept openly. Others screamed in rage at an uncaring universe. A few simply sat catatonic, their minds refusing to process the scale of the disaster. Amidst the panic, the assembly speaker, the four-armed and formidable Ventress, stood at the central podium. "We need solutions," she boomed, her voice cutting through the noise. "Science teams, analyze every fragment of data we have on these attackers. Military command, activate every defensive asset we possess. We will not surrender our civilizations without a fight." But even as she spoke, Vorik saw the truth in her eyes, the same terror he felt in his own heart. They all knew it. The assembly had no weapons that could touch these invaders. Their shields were useless. Their fleets were little more than target practice. They had built a utopia on the flawed assumption that all conflict could be negotiated, that superior technology and galactic cooperation could solve any problem. They had been profoundly, catastrophically wrong. Just then, a young aide named Rafe hurried to the podium, his hands shaking as he held out a data tablet. "Ambassador Ventress," he said, his voice trembling, "I found something in the deep archives. It's from 15 years ago." The display activated, and the image it projected sent a shock of recognition through Vorik. It was Admiral Patricia Valdez, her human features etched with stern urgency. The recording was from the final heated session before humanity's expulsion from the assembly. Her voice, though a recording, filled the chamber with a barely controlled frustration as she presented sensor data showing massive energy signatures at the very edge of the galactic rim. "Unknown entities are watching us," Admiral Valdez's recorded voice echoed, a ghost from a past they had chosen to bury. "Our deep space monitoring stations have detected movement patterns suggesting a vast, coordinated intelligence. Ship signatures that match nothing in any database. Something is out there, studying us, learning our weaknesses. We must investigate. We must prepare our defenses. Please, I am begging you, do not ignore this warning." The recording continued, showing the assembly's response. Laughter, derisive, dismissive gestures. Accusations of human warmongering, of paranoid fear tactics. Vorik felt a cold sickness wash over him as he remembered his own words that day, calling Valdez and her people aggressive and dangerous. He remembered casting his vote to expel humanity, smugly believing he was protecting the galaxy from the real threat to peace. The recording ended. A crushing, suffocating silence fell over the grand chamber. Every single delegate, every leader, now understood the monumental weight of what they were seeing. Humanity had known. They had tried to warn them. And for their foresight, they had been ignored, mocked, and exiled. Now, 15 years later, that warning had returned as an unstoppable, world-ending nightmare. In the dead silence, Ambassador Ventress's voice was a barely audible whisper, breaking with the weight of their failure. "Find the humans," she said, her voice cracking. "Find them now." The transmission crawled across the void for 3 days, leaping from one relay station to the next, a desperate prayer cast into the dark. These stations marked the border, the edge of assembly space, and the beginning of the unknown territory humanity had withdrawn to. 15 years. That's how long it had been since their exile. They had simply vanished, severing every diplomatic tie, silencing all communication. For 15 years, they were ghosts, a haunting memory on the fringes of the galaxy. I led the delegation, Vorik. With me stood Ventress, Rafe, and a dozen others, representatives from every corner of the assembly. We were gathered in the communications center, our eyes fixed on screens displaying the relentless devastation. The alien fleet, this unstoppable tide, had already consumed 90 systems. Billions of lives were extinguished. Entire civilizations, with all their history and art, were just gone. Our military, what was left of it, had fallen back to defend the core worlds. It wasn't a strategy for victory. It was a desperate attempt to buy time. But time for what? Where could anyone evacuate to when the entire galaxy was on fire? The aliens moved with a terrifying, methodical patience, sweeping through space, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. Our own projections gave us 6 months. 6 months until they reached our homeworlds. 6 months until extinction. On the 4th day, we got a response. It wasn't a video, just a simple audio feed. A voice I hadn't heard in 15 years, yet instantly recognized. Admiral Patricia Valdez. She sounded older, her voice strained with a weariness that chilled me to the bone, but it was unmistakably her. "We received your distress call," she said, her words cutting through the tense silence of the room. "We know what you're facing. We've been fighting them for 3 years. The words hit us like a physical blow. 3 years. While the assembly had been patting itself on the back, celebrating its fragile peace, humanity had been at war. While our diplomats gave speeches about enlightened cooperation, human beings had been dying, holding back the very nightmare they had tried to warn us about. A hot, acidic shame burned through me. We had been so arrogant, so blind. "They call themselves the Devourers," Valdez continued, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "They come from the dark space between galaxies. Their technology? It operates on quantum principles we're only just beginning to grasp. They don't want to conquer you. They want to consume you. Every world they touch is stripped bare. All biological matter, all resources, everything. They leave behind nothing but dead rocks." Rafe, his face pale, stepped forward. He spoke to the empty air, as if he could will his voice across the void to her. "Can you help us? Please, we're losing everything." The silence that followed felt like an eternity, as his desperate plea traveled through space. When Valdez finally replied, her tone held something I'd never heard from a human before. It wasn't anger at our betrayal. It wasn't smug satisfaction at being proven right. It was a bone-deep exhaustion, fused with an unbreakable resolve. "We're already on our way. The human defense fleet will arrive in your space within 48 hours. A collective gasp went through the room. Hope, something we hadn't felt in weeks, flickered back to life. But then she added, "But you need to understand something. We are not coming to save the assembly. We're coming because if the Devourers finish with you, they'll come for us next. This is about survival, not rescue." The transmission ended, leaving behind coordinates for a rendezvous in neutral space. Ventress immediately dispatched our fastest diplomatic ships. I insisted on being on the lead vessel. I had to face them. I had to look into the eyes of the people we had wronged and ask them to save us. We met them in the threshold system, an empty stretch of stars that had become the unofficial border. When the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, my breath caught in my throat. I had expected a small force, a token gesture. What appeared before us was a fleet of 300 warships, arranged in a perfect lethal formation. But these were not the ships I remembered. The old human vessels were brutal, efficient boxes bristling with weapons. These new ships, they looked like they were forged in the same hell that created the Devourers. Their hulls were sleek, made of an armor that seemed to absorb light itself. The weapon systems were unlike anything in our databases. And most unnerving of all, sections of their ships pulsed with the same quantum energy signatures as the Devourer fleet. "They've been learning," Ventress whispered beside me, his voice filled with awe. "Learning from the enemy." Admiral Valdez's face appeared on our main screen. She was a ghost of the woman who had stood before the Assembly Council. Gray now streaked her dark hair. Faint scars traced across her face. Her eyes held that 1,000-yard stare, the look of someone who has witnessed far too much death. But her voice, when she spoke, was as steady as iron. "Ambassador Vorik, Chancellor Ventress, it's been a long time." I forced myself to meet her gaze. "Admiral, I want to say that we were wrong. We should have listened. We are sorry for what we did to your people." A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "Save the apologies for after we survive. Right now, I need everything you have on the Devourer forces in your space. Ship counts, movement patterns, weapon capabilities, everything. For the next 6 hours, we shared all our data." The human officers listened with an intense, unnerving focus as our commanders detailed the attacks, the mounting casualties, the complete failure of our tactics. Valdez's team absorbed the information, asking sharp, precise questions, and with a ruthless efficiency, they began to build a battle plan. "Your shields are based on electromagnetic principles," Valdez explained, her voice sharp and clinical. "The Devourers phase their weapons right through them. You need quantum resonance barriers, and we don't have time to rebuild your entire fleet's defensive grid. So we're going to use your ships as bait." The plan was brutal, horrifying in its simplicity. Our assembly ships would engage the Devourers head-on, drawing their fire, their attention. The human fleet, using their advanced jump drives, would strike from unexpected angles, hitting the enemy with quantum disruption weapons, the only things that could actually hurt them. It meant sacrificing our crews, sending thousands to their deaths to save billions. I looked at the tactical display. The Devourers had now consumed 120 systems. Every hour we debated, another world died. I thought of the young colonists, the families, the children, all erased because we had chosen comfort over vigilance. "We'll do it," I said, my voice firm. "Our fleets will be the bait. Just tell us how to make our deaths count." Valdez looked at me for a long moment. "You're not wrong, Vorik. The Assembly made terrible mistakes. You chose an easy peace over hard truth. You expelled the only people who saw the storm coming. But you know what? We made mistakes too. We let our pride drive us into isolation. Maybe if we'd tried harder to make you listen, things would be different." She stood, and her entire command crew rose with her. "So let's stop talking about who was right and who was wrong. Let's focus on making sure someone is left to learn from our mistakes. Prepare your fleets, Ambassador. We attack in 12 hours. The Battle of Carthan Prime. That's what history would call it. A moment the galaxy learned that courage matters more than technology." Assembly ships jumped into the system, right into the jaws of the Devourer fleet that was consuming another world. 300 of our ships against 400 of theirs. The odds were impossible, but they fought. Our crews flew their ships directly into weapons fire that tore through their hulls like paper. They held the line as their friends and comrades died around them. They bought time, precious, vital seconds. And then humanity struck. Quantum torpedoes slammed into devourer hulls from a dozen different angles at once. For the first time since this nightmare began, the enemy ships exploded. The battle raged for 6 brutal hours. Our losses were catastrophic. 200 ships gone, 50,000 crew members dead. But when the smoke cleared, the devourer fleet was shattered. The survivors fled, their relentless advance finally broken. From the bridge of my ship, I watched as human vessels moved through the wreckage, pulling our survivors from crippled ships, treating our wounded without a moment's hesitation. When a Celthian frigate's power core went critical, a human destroyer moved to shield it, absorbing the full force of the blast to save a ship filled with evacuating children. Humanity hadn't come for revenge. They had come to fight. And by fighting alongside us, despite every reason they had to let us burn, they showed us all what true strength really meant. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next one. 6 months later, Ambassador Thane Vorik stood once again in the Grand Assembly Chamber. The hall looked different now. The crystalline walls showed scars from recent repairs. Half the delegate seats sat empty, representing species still rebuilding from devastating devourer attacks. And in the center, where assembly representatives traditionally held exclusive authority, human officers sat shoulder to shoulder with their former adversaries. Admiral Patricia Valdez had been offered the position of Supreme Military Commander for the Unified Defense Forces. She accepted on one condition, that humanity would never again be expelled for speaking uncomfortable truths. The Assembly had agreed unanimously. They had learned the high cost of comfortable lies. The war against the Devourers continued, but the tide had finally turned. Human quantum weapons, combined with the Assembly's vast resources and scientific knowledge, created devastating new defensive systems. Species that had never cooperated before now worked together, sharing technology and tactics. The frontier was pushed back, light year by painful light year. Vorik spent those 6 months visiting the wounded, attending memorials for the fallen, and listening to survivors tell their stories. He met a young Kashan pilot named Jessa Thorne, who had flown 17 missions, despite losing her entire squadron in the very first battle. He spoke with the family of a human engineer, Marcus Reeves, who had died holding a damaged reactor core stable, just long enough for his crew to evacuate. He held the hand of a Crithian mother who had lost 3 children when the Devourers took her homeworld. Each story reinforced the same hard-learned lesson. Peace isn't the absence of weapons or warriors. Peace is what you build together when you refuse to let fear divide you. The Assembly's great mistake had been believing that safety came from pushing away those who understood danger. True safety, he now knew, came from standing together against the darkness, even when it terrified you. Chancellor Ventress approached the podium, her 4 arms moving in a gesture of solemn respect. "We gather today," she began, her voice echoing through the scarred chamber, "to remember what was lost and honor what was saved. 15 years ago, we celebrated peace by excluding those who warned us of war. We believed ourselves wise. We were fools. Today, we build a different kind of peace, one forged in shared sacrifice, one that acknowledges the darkness exists, but refuses to face it alone." Admiral Valdez stood when called, her uniform now bearing decorations from a dozen different species. "The Devourers taught us something valuable," she said, her voice clear and strong. "They showed us that the galaxy is not a safe place, that threats exist beyond our borders, beyond our understanding, beyond our capacity to wish them away. But they also showed us something more important, that when we stand together, when we combine our strengths and cover each other's weaknesses, we are capable of miracles. The Assembly could not stop the Devourers alone. Humanity could not stop them alone. Together, we're winning." Rafe Thornwell, now a senior diplomatic attaché, presented the memorial registry. The numbers were staggering, almost incomprehensible. 11 billion souls lost to the Devourer invasion. Entire species reduced to refugee populations. Worlds burned clean of life. But beside those painful numbers stood others. 300 billion saved by the combined defense effort. 20 species evacuated successfully from doomed worlds. 47 new colony worlds established in secure territories, where survivors could finally begin to rebuild. Vorik read names from the registry, spending hours honoring the dead. He read assembly names and human names without distinction, because death had made no such distinctions. Each name represented a life, a story, a future stolen by an enemy that cared nothing for politics or old grievances. Each name was a stark reminder of the cost of unpreparedness. But between the names of the dead, Vorik saw something new emerging. New friendships forged in the heat of battle. Assembly scientists working alongside human engineers to crack Devourer technology. Mixed species crews that fought with a unity born from shared danger. Children of different species playing together in refugee centers, their parents too busy surviving to teach them old prejudices. The peace they were building now looked nothing like the comfortable isolation of before. This new peace had sharp edges and difficult truths. It acknowledged that safety required vigilance, that cooperation sometimes meant uncomfortable compromise, and that protecting your civilization might require trusting someone you once called an enemy. But it was real, it was strong, and it was earned through sacrifice rather than assumed through wishful thinking. As the memorial ceremony concluded, Vorik found himself standing beside Admiral Valdez on the observation deck, overlooking the assembly district. Below them, construction crews worked around the clock, rebuilding damaged sections. Human and assembly workers, side by side, literally building the future together. "Do you think we can win?" Vorik asked quietly. "Truly win, not just survive?" Valdez was silent for a long moment, her eyes distant. "I don't know," she admitted. "The Devourers are vast. We've barely scratched their forces. But I know this. We have something they don't. We have hope. We have the ability to learn and adapt. And we have each other now. That has to count for something." Vorik nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle back on his shoulders. It wasn't the burden of guilt, though he knew he would carry that forever. It was the weight of purpose. The assembly had failed once because they chose comfort over hard truths. They would not fail again. Whatever came next, they would face it together. In the months and years that followed, humanity and the assembly built something unprecedented. Not the shallow peace of before, but a genuine alliance forged in the fires of shared suffering. They established joint military academies where young officers from 100 species learned to fight as one. They created scientific exchanges that pushed the boundaries of knowledge, and they built monuments not to celebrate victory, but to remember what divided people could lose. The war against the Devourers would last another 8 grueling years before the enemy was finally pushed back beyond the galactic rim. The cost would be staggering. But when the last Devourer ship finally retreated into dark space, the galaxy that emerged from the conflict bore little resemblance to the one that had entered it. The Galactic Assembly still existed, but it was no longer a club of comfortable species, excluding those who made them uncomfortable. It was a true parliament of civilizations, bound together by shared sacrifice and mutual respect. Humanity took its place not as outcasts or conquerors, but as equals among equals. And when new threats eventually emerged from the depths of space, as they always would, the galaxy faced them together. Vorik lived another 40 years, long enough to see the first generation born after the war reach adulthood. They grew up in a galaxy that remembered the cost of division, a galaxy that honored both the assembly dead and the human sacrifice. And that understood peace must be actively maintained, rather than passively assumed. He hoped they would be wiser than his generation had been. He believed they would be. On the day, Morik finally passed surrounded by friends and family from a dozen species. His last words were about the lesson that had defined his life, that the greatest threat to peace is not the enemy at your gates, but the warning you refuse to hear. That wisdom sometimes wears an uncomfortable face, and that those who speak hard truths deserve your attention, not your exile. The galaxy remembered, and by remembering, it endured. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the vast unknown.